that's where I want to go to next here, because one of the other really great things about this poll is how much it dives into the politics of these gun owners, because this sort of I don't know, maybe a unified theory about the surge in gun ownership that exists in pro-gun circles now, where millions of people became gun owners for the first time. Gun owners tend to vote more pro-gun than non-gun owners. To put it in extremely simple terms, they tend to dislike more gun restrictions. They tend to prefer looser gun laws than people who don't have a gun in the home. And that is also something you find in this survey itself. So the idea goes, plus all these new gun owners are from these demographics that traditionally, at least on the demographic level, not necessarily individually, obviously, but we're talking about big groups of people, they tend to vote more Democratic. And so some people, I think, had the idea that this was going to, turn people overnight into party line Republican voters, because that's the ostensibly pro-gun party in our two-party system. There's very big contrast on policy, certainly between the two parties when it comes to guns at this point, and it's pretty stark, and everybody knows it. That obviously hasn't happened to a certain extent. Obviously you didn't have all these new gun owners immediately become reliable Republican voters, but perhaps I've always thought, at least, that what makes more sense is over time you'll see some of these new gun owners change their position on guns, at least, and that could have an effect at the very least in Democratic circles.
Sure.
Where there's some more moderation, because the party itself has moved really to the left on the issue over the last decade or so. And I don't know that we've seen that effect yet. And these numbers in here might explain why. So can you, one of the things that I notice when I look at it, and I want to get your understanding of this, it sure seems like Democrats are driving for the most part, this huge increase in gun ownership among voters. But at the same time, they're actually becoming more. It's when you ask them the question of whether they're more concerned about the government going too far with gun regulation or not going far enough, they've actually moved. Democrats as a whole, as they've become more likely to own guns, are actually more concerned that the government will be too loose in their gun restrictions. Yeah. Is that an accurate reading of this poll?
Yeah. So, there's two things that really drive opinion on gun rights. One is having a gun in the household, and two is your political affiliation. And when we combine those two things and we look at Democrats who have a gun in the household or Republicans who have a gun in the household, it doesn't override their politics, meaning they will vote their partisan leaning over whether or not they have a gun in their household. So it continues. Another way to think about it is partisanship continues to divide gun owners on gun ownership as much as it does non-gun owners on gun ownership. It doesn't putting a gun in a responsible American's hand does not make them a Republican. Look,
but it also doesn't even seem to necessarily totally change their mind on the core question. As long as I guess we are talking about people who are self-identifying with one party or another. So if you consider yourself strongly enough to say to a pollster that you are a Democrat, the fact that you own a gun doesn't necessarily change your concept of the policy implications.
Right. And I think if you think of that through, if they were able to obtain a gun, then what, do they believe that the government's being too harsh about gun ownership? Right. They could say, well, I got one. It wasn't that hard. It was adequately hard if you live in a state like California or something like that. Like it was hard enough that I feel good about the level. And I don't want it to be looser than that. So you can come at it from both ways. When I purchased firearms for myself, I'd purchased one on a weekend and I had to wait until, after a waiting period. And I thought that was a little bit stupid, but that's me as a Republican, in my personal opinion. I would say from the poll, the other thing that we need to keep in mind is there's very few people that make political decisions based just on the gun issue. It's like 9%
Right.
on that in our poll. About 9% of people tell us that gun rights or gun restrictions are the most important thing about their vote. Meaning, if they would vote for or against the candidate, regardless of party, based on that point of view. So compare that to other issues like protecting democracy and constitutional rights. That's like 19% of the population say that, yeah, that's the most important thing to them. And another large issue and divisive issue like abortion, that's 18% of the country or of voters. And again, another one that's above guns is immigration and border security. So there's lots of different things people weigh in their politics, and guns not the top thing.
Yeah, guns, and you see this a lot in polling. Guns tend to be maybe a second level issue, I guess, or in the middle.
Yeah,
they're not usually at the very bottom when it comes to voter motivation or your single most important issue questions in a lot of public polling. But
sure.
they're not usually the number one issue. Sometimes they'll, it depends on what the public's focused on, I guess, at any given moment. Sometimes they shoot up a little bit higher.
Sure.
Although usually that tends to be after mass shootings.
Yes.
I would say. So,
yes.
Although it could be also I imagine if there was, for instance, a major gun ban was signed into law, the number might shoot up because of that as well.
Not to take us on a tangent, but when the abortion law was signed, it used to be not the law. Sorry, when the abortion decision
Supreme Court case.
It used to be that the single issue abortion voter was a deep red Republican. But the next survey, that was for 20 years. That if you're a single issue, you were voting Republican, conservative, Fox News watching. It was deep. Mm-hmm. But as soon as the Dobbs decision came, in the very next survey we did, the single issue, the same question, the single issue abortion voters said, yep, that's the issue that I'll vote for based on that issue, nothing else. They were liberal blue, college educated women, which is, not the Republican base. So it was crazy. But they can change like that when laws change or something dramatic happens.
Which makes sense. Right.
Yeah, that's what huge finding in a poll in 2022 that we did for NBC as well.
In fact, I kind of wonder if, the Supreme Court ruling that came out alongside Dobbs in Bruin, the major gun case that they did, which really expands the courts recognized Second Amendment protections, at least. Because people will debate what the Second Amendment protects and what doesn't. Supreme Court said now explicitly that it protects gun carry, and you do wonder if that has a deflating effect on gun rights activism, right? How much people put that at the top of their list if they think it's what they want is secured by this ruling. They may not have it as much of a priority in their voting, list.
Yeah. That's
speculation.
In 16 years of doing this, and especially in this time period between basically the Obama era, or the late Bush, early Obama era is when I started doing polling, is angry people vote. Like angry people vote. And so when the abortion rights come under attack, and that's how the people see it, who got very active or very fired up about it, when they feel like their rights are under attack, they're going to go out and get active. So that happened in 2022. That happened in a large part in some of these little, I don't know if you follow this very closely, but some of these little elections, Ohio had an election about abortion rights and kind of
special elections and ballot initiative.
Elections. People are fired up. And so I think you're right, though, if you expand it sounds like, I haven't followed it very closely, but it sounds like the Supreme Court said that constitutional carry is basically protected.
Gun carry, public gun carry, they struck down New York's law. In effect, they also changed the test for how to determine if a gun law is constitutional. And so you're seeing a lot of gun laws come under question, the current laws
Yeah.
at the federal and state level. So,
Yeah. I think
it's had a big effect, and maybe that plays into how people perceive the issue as well. You can, I mean, I think what you're saying is just like a pretty good view of how politics works generally. Like people, the reason that a person's single most important issue changes all the time is because the perception of what's being attacked or not changes all the time as well, based on what happens in life, right? So that certainly makes a lot of sense, and that may be one of the things about having a stalemated gun debate in the United States is it probably pushes the importance of the issue a little bit further down for most people, because they either they don't expect things are going to change one way or the other, and whether they're like that or don't like that is another question, but they still have that ultimate conclusion, and it might drive down what they think matters